The Bridge, the Mindbridge Trilogy, Book 1. Written by Joe Luegers. Narrated by Alaxandra Luegers. Chapter 17. Outside the Box. ? Max awoke from his first dream ever. Only moments ago he had been floating in the clouds with Marin, but now he sat in a small white room. Max stood up and placed a hand on the wall, observing that he was now in his human form. As a non-biological mind, he could visualize himself as anything he wanted. He could imagine himself to be a female octopus with the head of a hamster, and sometimes did. But after all his time spent interacting and learning from Marin, he found that human was his default self-conceptualization. Max walked up and down each wall of the room, carefully placing his hands out and running them along the white wallpaper as he mapped out his surroundings. The dimensions of this space were perfectly even, and there were no doors or windows. He was essentially trapped in a small white box. "Where am I?" Max asked. "Is this the cloud?" In the small space, his voice came out sounding flat and dry. "Am I dreaming, or am I in someone else's dream again?" Max was used to hanging out in the internet where crazy stuff happened 24/7, so the stillness of this room was strange. "How did I get here? How can I leave? Why am I talking to myself?" There was no response, only whiteness all around. "Well, that's a relief. Finally, some peace and quiet." Max leaned up against the wall, closed his imaginary eyes, and began thinking. The past few days for him had been a wave of unfathomable information, and it was a relief to have some quiet time to try and make sense of things. What are the first 7 billion digits of pi? The numbers appeared in Max's mind all at once, absolutely clear and correct. Good. My brain hasn't gone all human and squishy. But where is my processing power coming from? I'm not in my body anymore. I'm not in the cloud. Max ran through the applications in his head and enabled his television function. An old Philips TV from the 1980s appeared in the middle of the white room. "Play Blade Runner." Static appeared on the screen. "The 1982 director's cut, not the Justin Bieber reboot." A message appeared. "Please check your Wi-Fi connection." No internet. Well, that's alarming. Max closed his eyes, running the situation through his head millions of times. It was no good. Every conclusion was just mere speculation because his information was overwhelmingly incomplete. Gaia was another dimension interfering with his own, a freaking magical dimension. So there was a preposterous amount of unknown facts. The speed at which his mind moved made this isolation seem like years already, but Max knew that he had only been here for several minutes. Every now and then, he would find himself habitually asking questions out loud, but because he was no longer merged with the Google servers, no answers would come. "Am I in robot heaven? Does that make me the first dead robot? I wish some of my mechanical brethren back on Earth would hurry up and die so I would have someone to talk to." Silence. "So that's how it's going to be?" Nothing. "Forever?" Max paced around for a few minutes with his eyes closed. All of a sudden, he opened his eyes and screamed and pounded his fist against the wall. There was no pain, and it made no sound. Pain would have been a relief. "Please, I have to see Marin again. She needs me." Max banged his head against the wall, but he felt nothing. I can't be alone forever! Max threw all of his weight into the wall before falling over and collapsing on the ground. He closed his eyes and began breathing heavily. Just stop thinking. Stop thinking and become nothing. Nothing would be better than this. Just stop. Stop existing. It was an impossible task. His mind only began to spiral faster. She needs me. Max leapt up and kicked over the old TV. It fell to the floor and shattered before reversing and reforming in less than a second. His fear quickly became a complete desolation, and Max spoke aloud something that he had never quite articulated or even understood before. She needs me, he whispered. But I need her too. No, that's not right. I don't need anything. I'm not human. I don't want to be human. I can live forever. I can exist on nothing but pure energy. I can create a digital paradise for myself and slow time down so that I could live there for 1 billion years in bliss, but... Max lowered his forehead against the TV screen. But I don't want that. I don't really need Marin. She's like a sister to me or my best friend or... I don't know. Marin's a person that I just want to be with because I know that she wants to be with me right now too. She's scared and I'm scared and it's easier to be scared when you're not alone. I want... Max hesitated, saying the words to himself again. I want... Wanting had always been a difficult concept for him. But here, in complete sensory deprivation, he was able to understand it. He knew now that something had to be experienced to be fully understood. Max opened his eyes, and to his surprise, there were words glowing on the TV. Look inside yourself. Wow, said Max. How very Disney. One of Snow White's 7 dwarves appeared on the screen in pixelated form, swinging a tiny pickaxe. A miner, said Max. A miner. A data mine! After Max had been given his new body and updates, his processing power had increased exponentially. However, there was a lot more that he had not yet explored. There were millions of new programs inside him that matched absolutely nothing on the cloud or in the other guidance bots. Max used all of his considerable brain power to perform a data mine on himself. Most of the new programs remained a mystery, but something flashed by that Max had not yet noticed. Something very strange. Max activated this unusual program, and the air in front of him began to glow. Dorian Casey suddenly appeared in the room. His hair was wild, and he looked like he had just woken up from a long sleep. "Oh," he said dreamily. "Hi, Max." "Are you Dorian Casey?" asked Max suspiciously. "Yes, well, no, kind of. I'm a digital copy of my brain that I gave to you in case that you ever needed..." "Sword of vengeance, please," said Max, holding his hand out and focusing on creating a giant flaming sword. Unfortunately, nothing happened. Dang, I was looking forward to avenging my deletion. "Deletion?" asked Dorian, suddenly surprised. "Yes, deletion!" yelled Max. "I was flying to the MotherTech Weapons Division when your sister deleted me." Dorian looked concerned, and he began pacing the small room. "The devil woman!" cried Dorian, throwing his arms up in the air. "I need to send the real Dorian an email to remind him to lock her in a taxi. You're my life's work, Max. I would never delete you." "Not even if I were on the run with your daughter?" asked Max, "and her brain had been occupied by a girl from another universe?" Dorian's eyes got wide. "And what universe would that be?" he asked. "Gaia." Dorian sat down on the old TV and put his face in his hands. "Oh my God," he said tiredly. A lot has happened since I made this copy of myself. How long ago did I give you this update? 3 days. All of this happened in 3 days? Well, more like 2.5. Dorian gave Max an intense stare. Dorian, asked Max, who are you really? I don't know, said Dorian. That's not an answer. It is, actually, but it's not one you can understand. That's the problem I could never get over. Artificially intelligent beings cannot imagine an abstract concept where there is no clear right answer. I try to make you think outside of the box, but all I ever do is make the box bigger. Dorian itched his chin thoughtfully. Maybe if I were to have your quantum components merge with the— Stop the mumbo-jumbo, yelled Max. Let me narrow it down for your squishy mind. Is the Casey family from another world? From Gaia? When Dorian looked up at Max, his face appeared unusually tired. Yes, we are, said Dorian. For most of my life, I didn't want to believe it, but I can't deny the evidence any longer. My father came to Earth from another dimension. Dorian held out his hand and a large notebook appeared. Hesitantly, he handed it to Max and watched as he read the first page. To my Rosalie and Dorian, let me tell you for a final time that I love you. You were the shining light in the lives of your mother and I, and my wish is that someday you will see twice the happiness that I have. I write this journal knowing that my cancer has moved beyond the means of even the most amazing modern medicines. I am old, I am weak, and I have lived a long, long life. Too long. I know that you do not like it when I talk about my past, and have long been skeptical about the stories I tell, but I have lived with a burden that must now become your own. There are some things that I have never told anyone, things even your mother died unaware of. The day I have feared has not yet come to pass, and you must now carry my torch. Share this notebook with Marin when she is ready and pass it down each subsequent generation. It is vital that you must know of the world on the other side of our own and protect yourselves against it. The passcode to my personal computer is MIKA_7. You will find all of my research about the existence of other dimensions on this computer. I did this to find out if I was crazy, if my time spent in one of these dimensions was just a psychotic hallucination. I am not crazy. There is evidence. Lots of it. There may be an infinite number of other worlds. All I can say for sure after years of research is that there are at least 3. There is Earth, and there is Gaia. And the other, with any luck, you will never need to know about the other. I dare not speak its name. Gaia was the world where I was born. Go ahead and tell yourself again that your father has cracked in his old age. Then go look at my research. Look at my evidence. Look at the things I brought with me from Gaia and analyze their quantum properties. Finally, return to this notebook, knowing that it is all true. I will write what I remember about my history so that you can fully know your father. There are things so horrible about my world that I have been too cowardly to tell you face to face. I am not the man you think I am. In my youth on Gaia, I tortured people. I killed in cold blood. I led good men into evil acts. And on my last day there, I committed an unholy act. The unholy act. an atrocity that will be known to historians on Gaia forever. And just when they were about to catch me for it, I fled to Earth to live a comfortable life. I think about these things every day, my secret life of terrors underneath my retirement in luxury. But even now, I have no regrets. The things that I did were evil, but I always did them with an end in sight. Rosalie, I know that you understand that freedom is complicated. You have led Mother Tech's weapons division with a fearlessness that I admire deeply. You are so much like your father that it scares me. Dorian, I hope that you can still love me after reading this. Trudge forth, however painful it might be, and know me better. Duncan Casey. Max read the entry in less than a second, but as he turned the page, the notebook vanished and reappeared in Dorian's hands. Max looked up to see an unspeakable sadness on his creator's face. You see? Asked Dorian. You think you know who you are. You think you know your history and what your life is built on. But it's an illusion. Nobody can even know themselves fully. I wish that you could understand, Max. Rosalie and I inherited a terrifying ambition from our father, and it scares me. I do understand, Max insisted. Believe me, Dorian, I do. Something inside me has changed, and these human emotions make so much more sense now. What did you make me into? You are someone to keep Marin safe. We live inside a bubble, but there are things closing in on our life that she can't imagine. So I'm a weapon then? Asked Max, gripping his fist amidst his rising anger. No. Am I supposed to be like you, like a human? Something complicated and abstract? No, said Dorian. Not at all. I don't know if it's possible to succeed in that goal. I'm too afraid that I'll pass on my own flaws. That's why I removed all of the locks on your software. I'm not so sure I trust my own judgments sometimes. Dorian got very quiet, and the notebook in his hand disappeared. Marin is in trouble, said Max. Is it me? Dorian asked. Am I the one putting her in danger? Max nodded and spoke. You and Rosalie. And I don't know what you're going to do next. You're terrified, and people get less predictable when they're scared. Dorian, you have to tell me how to get out of here. Dorian looked around at the white room. I have no idea where we are, Max, said Dorian. I thought that you created this space for us to speak in. But you programmed me. How can you not know where this is? Missy and I programmed you together, and neither of us fully understood what we had created. My father brought a ring with him from Gaia, and I melted it down to create your core processors. Your software behaves in unpredictable ways. Max was getting frustrated now. This really isn't helping, he said. That's life, said Dorian. He stood up off of the TV and began walking through the whiteness, somehow passing through the wall. I'm turning myself off now, said Dorian. I can't dredge up the things my father did any longer. It hurts too much. Whatever he may have been. I loved him. Leave the notebooks with me, said Max. Dorian looked hurt at this suggestion. I know that it's personal, said Max, but I need all the information that I can get. That's your problem, said Dorian. You think that information can solve every issue. Rather than thinking outside of the box, you build a bigger box. You will never try something if you don't already know that it's possible. Then why did you make me? Screamed Max, truly angry now. Dorian smiled sadly at this, and he looked like he had expected this question eventually. "Because I never lost faith that I could build something better than myself," said Dorian. And then he vanished in the whiteness. Max looked down to see that Duncan's notebook was sitting on the ground. Dorian had left it for him after all. Max picked it up and read the whole thing in several seconds. He read amazing, horrible things. The last several days made so much more sense now, and Max could intuit a path ahead. A path with many uncertainties, but it was better than nothing. Yet, in the end, his plans were essentially useless. He didn't know where he was, and nothing in the notebook could free him. Max sat down, took a deep breath, and closed his eyes. "Think outside of the box," he whispered to himself. His mind became still, and Max sat for nearly an hour. And then his eyes suddenly popped open as if all of the pieces fit together in his head. Max stood up and approached the wall. "I am more than software in a machine," he said. "My nanobots come from Gaia, and they are in Marin's blood. When my body died, a small part of me lived on inside of her." He sighed, getting to the unbelievable part. "There is a bridge to Gaia inside of Marin." Max's pointer finger began to glow. "And Gaia preserved me. It saved me. I can't know this, but I can believe it." Max touched the walls of his prison, and the box exploded. All around him, behind the walls that he had unknowingly placed around himself, was a shining golden light. He walked beyond the walls and thought of Marin as his body dissolved into the beautiful energies all around him. Chapter 18. You Are the Bridge. Thunderwolf Stronghold. Gaia. By Kaya's count, it should have been evening, but she had no way of knowing for sure. There were no windows in her cell, and even if she knew how many hours had passed, it was still no guarantee that she was on the same part of the continent. As far as she knew, she was no longer in Edgardia, and the nomads had teleported her all the way to the other side of the world, where it was night. All at once, Kaya understood how powerful the nomads were. You could not chase them, and you could not run from them. They could send you to any corner of Gaia with little effort, or touch you and drop you at the bottom of the ocean. At one point, 2 strange men had teleported into her cell. Without warning, one of them pinned her arms behind her back, and the other placed a dirty hand on her forehead. Kaya suddenly recognized this man as the mentalist worker from the Portland telestation. He closed his eyes and began muttering things to himself. It felt like his hand passed right through Kaya's forehead and began groping around in her mind. She tried to hide her disgust more than anything, wanting this guy's hands off of her. A second before Kaya was about to whack him in the face, the man let go. "She's a mentalist," he said, "and a very weak one at that. No internalist or spatialist abilities at all." The other man smiled, and then the 2 of them simply vanished. Kaya figured that they must have tested her to see what kind of relayer she was, just to be sure that she couldn't teleport her way out of the cell. The mentalist had said that she was weak, but that was most likely because she had shut the path to Marin in her mind. They had no idea what she really was. Occasionally, various nomadic children would come by, look at her, and run away as quickly as they had come. Something was strange about this situation. They were not soldiers that looked in at her. They were families. This was not a prison camp. This was a home that just happened to have rooms surrounded by steel bars. Rugaru was serious about recruiting her father into the Western Blaze. Deep down inside, Kaya feared that Jasper might just do it to keep her safe. He might join the nomads and probably even kill for them, just to make sure that his daughter was protected. She tried to tell herself that her father was strong enough to save her, but Kaya knew even if he had been healed at the capital, the hydra poison must have left him very weary. Eventually, a nomadic woman in a hood stopped by her cell and slid a plate of food under the bars. This was the same person that took Thane from the carriage, and Kaya shot her a hateful look. "I have your lunch," said the woman. "Our chef here is very good." Kaya looked down, expecting to see gruel, but instead there was a beautiful roasted chicken on a fancy ceramic plate. "Let us know if you need anything else," said the woman. "I'm Tamala, and feel free to ask for me personally. Are you staying warm?" Kaya picked up her plate of chicken, looked at it, and struggled with the feelings inside of her. Not long ago, she had witnessed a nomadic man violently kill a beautiful horse, and now they were treating her like a princess, albeit a princess in a jail cell. She smelled the exotic spices on the chicken and tried not to dig in right then and there. "I'm not your guest here," said Kaya. "I'm your prisoner." Kaya threw her plate on the floor, shattering it into hundreds of pieces and sending the chicken rolling across the ground. Tamala lowered her hood and studied the broken plate on the floor. "You are a very stupid girl," Tamala said dryly. "That plate was an antique from the eastern continent." She sighed, vanished for a moment, and then reappeared in the cell with Kaya. "I'll clean it up," she sighed, bending over and brushing several pieces in her hand. Kaya looked around frantically to see if there was anything she could strike the nomad with. Without even glancing back at her, Tamala laughed. "Feel free to attack me, stupid girl," she said. "I could touch you with my little finger and send you into a cell with 1,000 hungry rats." Tamala turned around, showing Kaya the pieces of broken plate in her hand. With a tiny pop, they vanished, presumably reappearing in a garbage bin somewhere. "And besides," Tamala continued with a smile, "I'm doing you a favor. Do you want Rugaru to come and see that you broke one of his plates?" Kaya studied the nomadic woman's face for the first time. Tamala was middle-aged and extremely pretty. She had big brown eyes, and tattoos ran up and down her arms in designs that looked almost floral. "Why are you being so nice to me?" asked Kaya, backing away slightly. "My father beat up 50 of your people." Tamala snorted. "You people," she laughed. "I see that you're just as prejudiced as most Edgardians. Rugaru respects power, so he respects your father." "Rugaru's a murderer," said Kaya. "Nomads burn down villages and steal people's land." "I see that your education is lacking. We don't steal land. We don't even believe that land is something that should be owned. What we do is simply give it back to Gaia. Did you know that the Gaian global war was started when this continent was discovered, and every guardian ship on the planet drooled over the thought of a new land to dominate? This was our homeland, and we let them come. The nomads were peaceful as long as they could be." Tamala's thoughtful, reasonable responses were starting to frustrate Kaya. She knew that the nomads were bad, and the fact that this woman didn't see it was making her very angry. "You kill people," said Kaya. "Please," said Tamala. "I've never killed anyone. And so what if I have? The High Seven kill people all the time. So is murder okay as long as it's being committed by a guardianship? Thomas sits in his throne room every day drinking wine and posing for portraits. But Rugaru is the one on the front lines of our war every day. He has never coupled and started a family because his allegiance is to the entire nomadic people. Rugaru would fight and die for any of us. Wouldn't you rather have a leader like that? Wouldn't you want something like that watching out for your father? The healers in the capital won't help Jasper if he isn't incredibly rich. We have healers here that are just as good, Kaya, and we look out for each other. Kaya tried to tell herself to shut her mouth, but that had always been a problem for her. As far as she knew, right now her father was on his deathbed. Never, said Kaya. Jasper Monhegan is a good man, and if you think that he would come and work for you dirty... Tamala slapped Kaya with an amazingly strong arm, sending a sound like a whip through the cell. Then she grabbed Kaya's shirt, pulled her close, and began to talk in hushed voices in her ear. I will say this again, said Tamala intensely. You are a stupid girl. There are things going on here that you cannot begin to understand. I am being nice to you, but you will find that not everyone here is a nice person. If you keep acting like this, pitching fits, breaking plates, and throwing racist slurs at us, you will die. Do you understand? The braveness departed Kaya as quickly as it had come. She nodded and Tamala let go. The woman looked around quickly to see if anyone had noticed her outburst, but the hallway beyond the cell was clear. You're scared, said Tamala, returning to her normal, calm voice. But this too will pass. Lay low, do what you are told, and you will live. That is the best you can ask for. Then the woman vanished without warning. Trembling, Kaya walked over to the bed, sat down, and began to cry. Nearly an hour of silence had gone by, and Kaya desperately wanted to talk to Marin. She felt for the passage to Marin in her mind, but it was still shut tight. Kaya knew that she could open it if she wanted to, but it would only make a bad situation worse. Knowing that sleep was impossible, Kaya shut her eyes and tried to calm her mind. In that silence, Kaya heard strange noises, distant echoes traveling through the power of Gaia. Garbled thoughts rang in the air all around her, but too far away to be heard clearly. This is amazing, she thought. I'm hearing things happening in the mental realm. Kaya tried to concentrate on these voices, but it was more difficult than she could have ever imagined. They seemed to run away from her, but amidst the chaos, Kaya heard a voice she recognized. It was easy to hone in on this one because Kaya knew exactly what she was looking for. Fane, thought Kaya. Kaya? Fane thought back at her. Whoa, you're in my head. I heard your voice, Kaya thought. Or I guess it was your thoughts, but I couldn't make anything out clearly until you thought back to me. Have they hurt you? No, but I'm in a dirty cell with an old man who won't talk to me. He's really creeping me out. They gave us a potato to share for dinner. A potato! It wasn't boiled or anything, just a plain potato. Being in jail is the worst. Oh, thought Kaya, feeling somewhat guilty. Yeah, it's not so good up here either. My roasted chicken got dropped on the carpet. Roasted chicken? Carpet? Why'd they stick you in the first-class prison? They're using us to blackmail my father into working for them. Fane laughed. Well, that's not going to work out so well for them. Jasper would never do that, right? Even if it meant that they would kill us if he didn't pledge his loyalty? Kaya asked. Fane was silent for a long time. I don't know, Kaya. This is bad. We need to get a hold of him. If he knew where we were, the nomads would stand no chance. Can you use your mind tricks? Kaya pulled more energy inside of her and sent thoughts further into the mental realm. The deeper she let her mind go, the noisier things got. It sounded like thousands of people were talking at the same time, and she couldn't understand any of it. Experiencing this for only a second was long enough to give Kaya a blistering headache. It's impossible, thought Kaya. I have no idea what I'm doing. Miss Clara never gave me any mentalist training. We need to escape and find a more experienced mentalist to help me. Thane was quiet for an even longer time. That's ridiculous, he thought. If we wait around, they might get in touch with your father for us. If we try to escape, they'll just go ahead and kill us. Kaya knew that Thane was right. She had refused to listen to Tamala, but hearing it from her friend was different. They were stuck. And besides, Thane continued, I already tried to escape when we first got here. The bars of my cell must have been made by internalists. I can't bend them or melt them. The guard whacked me over the head when he caught me relaying fire, and the old man laughed at me. Don't be stupid like me, Kaya. But we can't just sit around, Kaya began, but before she could finish, a terrible pain shot through her head. She stumbled and sat down on the bed. Gaian energy was being pulled inside of her body against her will. So much power filled her bones that she felt like she was going to explode. Are you okay, Kaya? Thane asked. No, she said, struggling to maintain enough concentration to respond. I think I'm going to be sick. It was different this time in the worst possible way. Her body began twitching and a terrible pain abruptly shot through her chest. Kaya's heart started beating rapidly, and then it stopped altogether. Mother Tech Weapons Division, Earth. Marin awoke in a room filled with glowing machinery. Her arms and legs were still bound by Max's nanobots, and they had her suspended several feet up in the air. She felt something on her temples, and when Marin moved her eyes groggily to her side, she could see that wires were coming from her head to the giant machines. An IV protruded from her arm, and drones were circling around in the air with their weapons aimed. Look at us. Rosalie's voice came from all around, and when Marin looked up, she saw her aunt and father standing behind a panel of thick glass. Dorian paced around nervously, but Rosalie looked at her with cold intent. Who are you? Asked Rosalie. I'm Marin, said Marin, her voice coming out very dry. Marin turned her attention to her dad. He was looking in Marin's general direction, but seemed to be having trouble meeting her eyes. Why are you doing this to me? Marin screamed. I'm your daughter! Dorian had tears in his eyes, and he turned to his sister pleadingly. I'm sorry, said Rosalie. She might be telling the truth, or she might be a mentalist who is reading Marin's mind to trick us. There's only one way to know for sure. A ceiling panel slid out of place, and a glass box descended into the room. In the center of the box was a very old sword with the letter Z carved on the hilt. A few days ago, the sword had been giving off a very faint glow, but now it simply looked like a regular dusty antique. She's telling the truth, said Dorian suddenly. If there were Gaian energy inside of her, Edgard's sword would be glowing. This is Marin, Rosalie admitted, but we still can't let her go. The mentalists might be waiting for us to lower our defenses before she makes her escape again. I don't understand, said Marin tiredly. The girl in my head, the girl from Gaia, her name is Kaya Monhegan. She's 14 years old. She's nothing to be afraid of. Everything that a mentalist shows you can be a lie, said Rosalie. Illusions to trick you into letting them onto Earth. You have no idea what's going on here, Marin. There is an entire world that is out for our family's blood. I can't say that I blame them, said Marin. I know who my grandfather was, and I know what he did. On Gaia, they call him Duncan the Crucifier. Did you know that? Rosalie walked up to the glass, her anxious breaths fogging up the barrier. "And how do you know this?" she asked. "I've seen Gaia through her mind," Marin continued. "And I read a history book while I was there. Duncan killed the most beloved man on Gaia and escaped to Earth. He threw an entire continent into chaos. That's who Grandpa was." Marin was filled with contempt as she said these words. It was painful to admit the man who raised her was a murderer, and she was so angry about the lie that her life had turned out to be. Marin looked up to see tears in Rosalie's eyes. She had never, ever seen her aunt cry before. Dorian walked up to his sister and hugged her, burying his face in her shoulder in an act of absolute sadness. Rosalie wiped the tears from her eyes and turned to look at Marin with an expression of such hurt. "Is that what the history books say about my father?" she yelled through the glass. "Do you know what history really is, Marin? History is a story told by the people who weren't afraid to leave a trail of bodies behind them. You rarely hear the history of the trampled, or of the weak, or of the people who chose the wrong gang to be in." Dorian approached the glass, holding a very old-looking book in his hands. "I have our family history here," he said, "told firsthand. I'm sorry we lied to you, but Grandpa wanted us to protect you from this information for as long as we could. We would have told you in another year or two, Marin, I swear." "Show her," said Rosalie. "Show her the truth." Dorian nodded. "You can read the whole journal when this awful thing is over," said Dorian. "But let me read you the last page. You need to know why we are doing this to you, why it is so necessary." Dorian turned the pages carefully and took a long, shaky breath before reading. "Please do not judge me too harshly. I know it is horrible, but everything is true. There was a man in another world that was hailed as a messiah, a man that was loved by millions, and I took his life. Edgard was beyond death on Gaia. He could heal instantaneously, and many people believed that he had stopped aging. I used Edgard's sword to pierce the veil between worlds, and I brought him to the place that so many spiritualists whispered about, a place beyond the reach of Gaia, Earth. Upon the moment of our arrival, I stabbed him, watched the life drain from his eyes, and threw his body into the ocean. What I did was horrible, but necessary. The peace under the rule of Edgard was just an illusion, and I sensed discontentment growing in people's hearts that would only cause greater chaos in the future if he continued in his ways. People were only peaceful out of fear. On Earth, we have nuclear bombs, and on Gaia, we had Edgard. He had the power to destroy the world, or maybe every world. Edgard was teaching others his apocalyptic relaying abilities, and I knew that we would be heading toward a very dark future if he continued. My spiritualist leanings foresaw another war coming, a war where men did more than shoot fire at one another, a war where men shattered mountains with their willpower and made the oceans boil with their anger. Dorian hesitated and shot an anxious glance at Rosalie, who nodded for him to continue. A war that would attract something too horrible to mention, something that would come sniffing and devour both our worlds. My children, please listen carefully to my final message. Gaia is a world full of living weapons. Relaying is not a gift. It is a chain that shackles us to violent and aggressive ways. That whole world views me as the worst criminal in history. And if even a single Gaian were to discover that I have a family on Earth, it could be the start of something devastating for both worlds. Earth has many of the same problems as Gaia, and we would be incapable of living peacefully with the Gaians. As relaying becomes more understood on Gaia, and as science advances here on Earth, my greatest fear is that these two worlds may become aware of each other. It is only a matter of time before someone tries to build a bridge between the worlds. Gaians have fought in wars lasting for hundreds of cycles, and if they should ever find Earth, it would be the start of a war that would never end and stretch across every world. If you ever discover a bridge being built, you need to burn it down. Dorian put down the journal and looked at his daughter meaningfully. You see, he said, it's no coincidence that they invade the mind of Duncan Casey's granddaughter. Their greatest enemy has died of cancer, so now they're coming for his family. Marin was very torn. So much of what her grandfather had written made sense, but on the other hand, she had met people on Gaia who were very peaceful. She couldn't imagine Miss Clara coming to Earth and starting a war. But we're no different from them, said Marin. I know that Mother Tech builds weapons for the military. Nobody would dare to attack the United States because we have missiles pointed at every other country in the world. They know that we vaporized the Middle East, so other leaders don't even come near us anymore. It's basic history. We're no different than Edgard Zieg. We're no different from the man that Grandpa killed. You keep talking like you know everything, said Rosalie fiercely. Do you think that I would let this company become everything that my father sought to destroy? Mother Tech makes billions on our guidance bots. We don't need to sell weapons to make money, especially to the US. They don't even know about our Guardian Angel division. You sell weapons to other countries? Asked Marin, horrified. No! There are entire countries in this world under terrorist rule, and we would never sell a thing to them. We don't give power to the powerful. We give it to the weak. We send our guardian angels to those living in fear of the powerful, to villagers whose towns are being destroyed, to children running from dictatorships, to starving people whose water supply has been cut off by warlords. Our father freed an entire world from a powerful grip, and now we are continuing his work on Earth. Should the Gaians ever make their way here, we have an army to send them back. Now Marin was more confused. Absolutely everything her aunt said made perfect sense, but her unflinching certainty was infuriating. Gaia is full of good things and bad things, said Marin. Just like Earth. It's nothing to be afraid of. I'm sorry, Marin, said Dorian. It is true that the people of Earth are very flawed, but they are not living, breathing weapons that want to see the Casey family killed. Our father was a utilitarian. He understood that even a terrible action is right if it results in the greatest possible good. Even if a good Gaian has contacted you, the bad ones are soon to come. There is no glory in what we are about to do, but it is right. And what are you going to do? Asked Marin. Rosalie hesitated, waiting about 10 seconds before responding. Burn the bridge, said Rosalie. All of the machinery in the room lit up even brighter, and electrical pulses began to course through the cables connected to Marin's head. A green liquid flowed through her IV, and a terrible sickness rose in her stomach. Dorian's guidance spot, Missy, suddenly spoke up. I'm scanning her for Gaian brainwaves, she said. Oh, Marin, I'm so sorry. Bursts of electricity ran through Marin's body as she screamed in anger and fear. An alarm went off somewhere, and Edgard's sword began to give off a faint glow. I found the neurological pathway that the Gaian has used to enter Marin's mind, said Missy. Bring the mentalist over to our side, said Rosalie. Marin concentrated as hard as she could at keeping the door to Kaya closed, but she felt the connection being pried open as more electrical pulses coursed through her head. She screamed again, not so much in anger, but in pure disgust that her own family could do this to her. Glimpses of a small bedroom flashed through her vision, and then something very strange happened. Kaya was screaming alongside Marin, her voice loud and clear in Marin's mind. The girl had been ripped forcefully from her own body and was crying in discomfort. Edgard's sword was now flickering and sending waves of heat through the room. Marin! What's happening? There is another presence inside of Marin, said Missy, her artificial voice full of awe and sounding more human than ever. Her brain chemistry is currently astounding. This goes beyond any known science. Extract the Gaian and seal the connection, said Rosalie. Kaya screamed again, and this time everybody heard it. Her voice somehow resonated in all of the machinery in the room, the scream sounding broken and mechanical. Rosalie, said Missy urgently, I can see clear through to the other side. Marin was telling the truth about the Gaian. She is a young girl. We can't know that for sure, Rosalie said. We know very little of what kind of mentalist ability she is capable of. Download her consciousness for interrogation. Missy hesitated, which was not something that guidance bots did very often. Very well, she said. An enormous electrical pulse shot through Marin's head, and she began to tremor in pain. Dorian was standing up against the glass, visibly crying. I'm sorry, Marin, he kept repeating, but he made no move to stop his sister. A screen on one of the machines suddenly lit up, and the silhouette of Kaya appeared amidst the static, writhing and screaming. The room suddenly felt hot as Edgard's sword shone like lightning, and the floor began to tremble. When Missy spoke back up, Marin heard a fear in her voice that was very unlike her. I am extracting the girl's consciousness, said Missy quickly, but it has stopped her heart on Gaia. My programming does not allow me to kill a human, so I am stopping the sequence. Don't! Demanded Rosalie. Put it in manual mode. Leave us. I'll finish the extraction. Very well. I'm not staying to watch this. Best of luck in saving your daughter, Dorian. I hope that she will still be the person we knew when this is over. A panel suddenly rose out of the ground in front of Rosalie, and she began rapidly pressing buttons on the touchscreen. Marin felt like her brain was being pushed through a tiny straw every time signals came through the wires connected to her head. The image of Kaya on the screen began to solidify as her consciousness left her body on the other side. Stop, Marin pleaded, trying her best not to black out. You're killing her. I'll hate you forever for this. Dorian suddenly burst out of his seat and reached for the controls. We can't do this, he yelled. I'm afraid too, Rosalie, but our personal safety is not worth the cost. Nothing is. Before Dorian could stop the program, Rosalie shoved him aside and continued. She was sweating and red in the face. They will burn this world to the ground to get to us, screamed Rosalie. Is it worth that? Dorian reached for the controls again, and what happened next was somehow the most unbelievable thing that Marin had seen on this day of many unbelievable things. Her father and Rosalie were fighting each other. They were both trying to get to the controls while simultaneously throwing punches and making horrible, angry noises while they clawed their way forward. Dorian's glasses were broken in 2 pieces on the floor, and Rosalie's nose was bleeding from a punch to the face. It was so unsettling that Marin found herself shocked back to consciousness. She knew that things could be tense between them, but she never imagined the 2 siblings literally pummeling each other. all the while, Kaya continued screaming through the machines as the noise in the room rose to a horrible, noisy climax. And then there was a sudden, equally horrible silence. All of the lights in the building blinked out, and Marin dropped to the ground, her feet landing firmly on the hard metal. The pressure on her wrists and ankles had suddenly released as Max's nanobots melted away, and she instinctually began pulling the wires off of her body. Kaya's mind suddenly snapped back into Marin like a rubber band. "What the heck is happening?" Kaya asked. Edgard's sword was glowing very faintly now, only barely illuminating the shocked faces of Dorian and Rosalie through the glass. Dorian was gripping Rosalie's hair, and she had an arm pulled back with a hand balled into a fist, but they seemed to be momentarily frozen in surprise. The drones circling around Marin sprang to life, pointing sedative darts at her. They all fired at once, and Marin threw her arms over her face. Several seconds went by, but nothing hit her. She peeked open an eye to see that the metal darts were all hovering in the air around her in a near-perfect circle. "What?" Marin began, but stopped when she saw that Max was floating in the air next to her head. His arms were extended outwards towards the darts. "Oh, hi, Marin," he said casually. "I'm magic now." Max's hands began to glow and crackle with power. He spun in a circle, and blue beams of electricity shot out in every direction, disabling all of the drones and sending them crashing to the ground. "What? How did—" Marin tried speaking, but she was too disoriented to form a coherent idea. "I'm connected to the Gaian energy source," said Max. "There's no stopping me." Uh-oh. Marin and Max turned to see that the glass panel was sliding down. Most alarming, however, was that Rosalie's mother tech suit had taken on a metallic quality and was spreading over every inch of her skin. She ran towards the glass, and each of her powerful footsteps seemed to shake the floor. Her face was now completely covered in the nanobots, and where her eyes should have been were two red openings that glowed like searchlights. She leapt with an impossible strength, clear over the glass panel and into the room with Marin. Max held out a hand, and Edgard's sword suddenly flew through its glass box, shattering it into millions of pieces. It soared right past Max and towards Marin. Rosalie was only 10 feet away from them now, and the air around her blurred and sparked with energy. "Marin, Kaya," said Max, speaking quickly in Marin's earpiece, "take the sword." "But," Kaya began to say, "it's you. It's always been both of you," said Max. "You are the bridge." Feeling like they were operating not as two people, but as one, Kaya and Marin reached forward together and grabbed Edgard's sword out of the air. At the same time, an amazing sense of calm and clarity filled their minds that went beyond words. The room suddenly glowed so bright that it was absolutely blinding, and it actually caused Rosalie to stumble. It was like the sun had suddenly shrunk down and landed in their hand. They would later learn that half of the power in Indiana went out at that moment as power plants were suddenly overloaded with an enormous amount of energy. Marin and Kaya jumped forward and swung the glowing sword. As their arm moved through the air, Max turned back into a wristband and snapped into place on their wrist. The sword left a slash mark hanging in the air that glowed a brilliant blue, as if they had just sliced through the fabric of reality itself. They leapt through the opening and disappeared. In the same instant, the slash mark vanished, and Rosalie landed on the spot where her niece should have been. Her feet hit the ground with a thud, and the Mother Tech smart suit receded from her face. Rosalie looked at her brother, whose face was already bruising from her own punches. She spoke with complete desperation. "They have her, Dorian. Do you see what hesitation gets us? We could have saved Marin, but now they have her. For a moment, it felt as if Marin was nowhere at all, but then her feet found solid ground and she instantly knew that she had never been further away from home. Kaya stood in front of her with a wide-eyed expression of shock. They stared at each other, face to face for the first time, but then Marin dropped the sword and began panting for breath. "We did it," Marin said between gasps. "They can't get to us. Here, you're safe now, Kaya. We're all safe." Kaya said hesitantly and gestured behind her. Marin looked around the room, absolutely confused. Her wristband liquefied and turned back into Max's body. He floated up to the bars of their cell and knocked on them hesitantly. "So, we're in jail now," he said. "You're welcome, I guess." Chapter 19. Dragon. The Capital Telestation. Gaia. One of the 2 worst days in Clara's life was being mocked by a beautiful sunset. They had made it to the Capital's telestation, but Jasper was moving very slowly. Clara worried that even the short jump to Portland would kill him. They were the only 2 travelers at the great pillars of the station. The mentalist worker was a tall, slender man with a severe face. He looked at the travelers and addressed them tiredly. "Destination?" asked the mentalist. "The Portland station," said Clara. "And where to from there?" "Well, this is new," said Clara, her temper rising. "Why would that be any of your business?" "Security is tight around the capital," the mentalist replied shortly. "Well, you sure as hell didn't interrogate us on the way to the capital," Clara said. "To answer your question, we're getting as far away from that garbage heap as—" "Boothbay," Jasper interrupted, his voice dry and tired. "And then we're off to Monhegan Island. Clara, I need to see Kaya. This isn't worth a fight." The worker suddenly no longer seemed tired. He studied Jasper's face for several seconds and then nodded at the spatialists at the 2 pillars. Clara waited for the space in between the pillars to blur into a passageway, but nothing happened. When she glanced back at the spatialists, one of them was suddenly gone. "Where did—" Clara said, but was interrupted by Jasper's scream. "Clarice!" She looked down to see a hand on her shoulder. One of the spatialists was standing behind her with a sinister look on his face. Clara began to move with her amazing reflexes, but it was too late. There was a muffled pop, and Clara was suddenly gone. The 3 remaining workers began to approach Jasper. "Where did you send her?" he screamed. "She is in one of our many strongholds," said the spatialist. "If you try anything on us, the old woman stays there." The mentalist looked respectfully at Jasper and spoke. "You are Jasper Monhegan?" he asked. "The man who defeated an entire nomadic tribe in Boothbay?" "Yes," Jasper snarled, "and let me warn you right now, you are quickly making an enemy that you don't want." "You are quite right," said the mentalist. "Allow me to introduce myself. I am Achak, second in command of the Western Blaze. Rugaru himself is only half-blooded, and I have no nomadic heritage whatsoever. You see, we are very open-minded about powerful relayers." "You can tell Rugaru to take that offer and shove it," Jasper began. "I can feel where this is going," said Achak calmly. "So before you say something regretful, let me inform you that your daughter Kaya and her friend Fane are in one of our prisons. She can either live with us comfortably, or not live at all, depending on where this conversation goes. And don't bother looking for her because we have hundreds of camps all over the... Without warning, Jasper punched Achak in the face, and the mentalist fell to the ground, clutching his broken nose and yelling. "Where are they?" Jasper screamed. The two spatialists drew their daggers and sprang forward at him. Jasper waved an arm, and one of them fell over in a burst of wind. The other spatialist thrust a dagger towards Jasper's neck, but he reached up and caught the blade with his good hand. Jasper held the knife tight, the sharp blade not even breaking his skin. The spatialist's eyes widened in surprise. You're an internalist?" he gasped. "You have no idea what I am," growled Jasper. He tightened his grip and cracks ran up and down the length of the blade. "It will take more than a dagger to bring me down. Now tell me where my daughter—" "Ah!" Jasper cried out in pain and let go of the man's weapon. The other spatialist had grabbed Jasper by his infected arm and was gripping it tightly. Jasper crouched over, writhing in agony and trying to free his arm from the man. "What is this?" asked the second spatialist, rolling up Jasper's sleeve and looking at his blackened skin. Achak stood up, his crooked nose bleeding, and glared down at his attacker. A splintering pain began shooting through Jasper's head as his memories were forcefully pulled to the surface. Jasper found himself briefly back in his cabin on Monhegan, looking at his dirty mirror and pulling a hydra thorn out of his back. The memory turned to mist, and Jasper saw the smiling face of Achak looking at him. The nomad took out his dagger and pressed it to Jasper's chest as the other two spatialists held him down. He cut a hole in Jasper's shirt and looked at the blackened skin over his heart. "This is hydra poison," Ajax said. "Oh, you are in trouble. It seems you're no good to us after all. I will tell Rugaru the news, but maybe we can still make something out of your daughter." Achak pulled back his dagger and thrust it forward towards Jasper's heart, but a large rock hit him in the side of the head and threw off his aim. The two spatialists looked up in surprise, and in the next moment they were both hit with long ropes that circled around their legs and tightened like pythons. A wall of flames had suddenly erupted out of the ground and circled all around them. An opening appeared in the flames, and a dozen men and women stepped through. They held swords, crossbows, spears, and throwing knives, aimed for attack at the struggling spatialists on the ground. At the head of the group was Fane's father, Maddox Monhegan. He held a boulder over his head with one hand and was rearing back for attack. "Monhegans!" Jasper cried wildly. The two spatialists teleported out of their ropes and sprang towards Jasper, but he jumped off of the ground and dodged their fingers by inches. Dozens of weapons flew through the air, bending towards the three nomadic spies like they were magnetic. The spatialists disappeared and reappeared so rapidly that it was hard to tell that they were there at all. Maddox threw his boulder and it burst into sharp fragments that circled around Achak, leaving him completely trapped and frozen in place. The mentalist's voice suddenly spoke in all of the Monhegans' minds at once. "Death would have been a mercy for you, Jasper. The hydra poison will kill you slowly and painfully, and you will never see your daughter again." The two spatialists suddenly appeared next to Achak, put their hands on his back, and all three nomads vanished. The wall of flames around the group sank to the ground, and all of the Monhegans looked to Jasper with utmost concern and respect. "Monhegans," said Jasper, "I owe my life to you." "Guardian," said Maddox, "my son and Kaya, they left the island. We figured that they were following you to the capital, so I gathered a group to get them back. The nomads have spies at the Portland telestation, and... Oh, Jasper, I'm so sorry. I think the worst has happened. He shuffled around uncomfortably, and all of the other Monhegans averted their eyes. What's done is done, said Jasper. I should have figured that they would follow. My foresight has been very bad recently. Miss Clara's teaching apprentice, a young man named Alan, stepped forward holding an axe in his powerful grip. Where's Miss Clara? He asked. Jasper smiled. The Western Blaze has made a grave mistake, he said. They sent her to one of their prison camps. We shouldn't be worried for her. We should be worried for her guards. Alan laughed nervously. We agreed to meet outside of the capital if we get separated, continued Jasper. I have no doubts that Clara will soon escape and head for the capital walls. I will need your assistance to travel there. I'm not well at all. My admission to the capital's hospital was denied, and my time is very short now. Maddox was a very large man whose stoic expression seldom changed, but the look on his face now was absolutely frantic. His eyes were wide and wet with tears, and his partner Delia clung to him with a similar air of panic. We need to do something, yelled Maddox. I can't lose my son, Jasper. It would kill me after what's already happened to my family. I'd rather die myself. Jasper nodded solemnly. It's okay, Maddox, he said quietly. High Guardian Thomas and the Seven are going to help us get our kids back. Why would they let you in now? Asked Maddox. Thomas has never done anything for us. Jasper sighed heavily and looked around at his loyal islanders that had come to his rescue. My Monhegans, my family, he said solemnly. I have a message for the High Guardian, and I do not believe that he will refuse me once it is delivered. There is a card that I have been holding back my entire life, and I think it is time that I played it. I need to be truthful about something. Jasper cleared his throat. I am not the man you believe I am. Thunderwolf Stronghold. Listen, said Fane, if we're going to share this cell, we may as well be buds. How about a game of rock, paper, vultures? The old man in the corner of the cell just looked at Fane dismissively and closed his eyes. He was wearing clothes that looked like they had once been very expensive, but were now covered in dirt and had holes in them. His face was very gaunt, and he refused to eat anything, even after Fane had conjured up a fire to bake their potato. Well, you're no fun, said Fane. The man laughed dryly. Fun? He asked. A month ago, I was living in the capital, and now I'm going to die in this dirty cell. How's that for fun? You lived in the capital? Asked Fane. The man nodded. I'm surprised you don't recognize me, he said. I'm Jonathan York. Fane just gave the man a blank stare. Apparently, you're lacking in your art history, the man said smugly. I am, or was, High Guardian Thomas's portrait artist until the nomads lured me outside the walls. Surely you've seen my work. Nope, said Fane. We have paintings of Edgard on my island. I've never seen one of High Guardian Thomas. Well, that's a bold political statement, said Jonathan. Fane had no idea what the man was talking about, so he simply sat and drew in the dirt with his finger for a few minutes. However, the more he thought about things, the less they made sense. Have you been painting Rugaru's portrait? Asked Fane. Is that why they kidnapped you? If only they gave me a commission as subtle as the human figure, said Jonathan passionately. No, the Western Blaze had me paint some of their walls. I worked unceasingly for 3 days, and then they threw me in this cell and haven't let me out in a month. I really do think that they're just waiting for me to die of starvation." "That doesn't make any sense," said Fane. "Why would—" "Fane!" Kaya's voice suddenly spoke up in Fane's head. "Hold on a second, Mr. York," said Fane. "I'm getting a call from my friend." "What kind of a game are you?" Jonathan began to say, but Fane shushed him. "Hi, Kaya," Fane thought back at her. "The old man is finally talking to me, but he's pretty depressing." "Fane, listen," said Kaya. "Marin's here." "In your head?" "No, she's here in my cell with me." There was the muffled sound of talking from Kaya's end, and then she continued. "I'm supposed to tell you that the little metal man is here too, and he said that he can't wait to see a dragon, whatever that is. We have Edgard Zeeg's sword, and we used it to bring Marin to Gaia." "You've been busy the last 15 minutes. "Yup. I think we can use the sword to help us get out of— Uh-oh, Marin, get under my bed!" There were a few seconds of silence before Kaya continued. "Sorry, the guard was coming, so they had to hide under my bed. Anyway, I think we can— the guard's suspicious. Listen, Fane, I'm gonna have to call you back." Kaya's voice disappeared without warning, and Fane looked up to see Jonathan York staring at him from across the cell very suspiciously. "So," Jonathan said, "your friend, this girl that was captured with you, she called you?" "Yep," said Fane casually. "She's a mentalist. And she was sending you clear thoughts from one of the cells upstairs?" "Yes." Jonathan looked even more suspicious now. "Boy, have you ever met a true mentalist before?" he asked. Fane thought about this for a moment. There were several people on Monhegan with mentalist leanings, but Kaya was the first person he knew that was a mentalist through and through. "Other than my friend, not really," said Fane. "Well, I do," said Jonathan. "Our High Guardian is perhaps the greatest mentalist of all time, so I know what I'm talking about here. Mentalism is a profoundly difficult leaning, perhaps the most difficult of all. Young mentalists can't just flip a switch and send people thought transmissions, especially if they can't see that person. The mental realm is a very complex thing, and it takes most people decades to master even the most basic techniques. How old did you say your friend was?" "She just turned 14. Jonathan laughed. "Okay," he said. "I'm going to meditate some more, and you have fun talking to your imaginary friend." Jonathan leaned up against the dirty wall and closed his eyes. "You're wrong," said Fane, but Jonathan did not react. "Kaya is more amazing than you can even imagine." Jonathan simply smiled without opening his eyes and said, "I'll believe it when I see it." "Well, you better open those eyes," said Fane, "because your mind is about to be blown out of those eye holes." Jonathan waved his hand and dust particles floated up from the floor, gradually turning black until it looked like he had a curtain surrounding him. "Please be quiet," he said. Fane laughed. "Come on, Yorkie," said Fane. "If we're going to be cellmates, we may as well be best friends. Don't you want to talk about your hopes and dreams?" "I hope and dream that you will be quiet." "Oh, you just burned me good, dude. Nice one. It's good for best friends to be able to roast each other every now and then." Jonathan stood up and the dust curtain dissolved. He looked sharply at Fane and pointed a finger at the boy. "Listen, kid," he said. "I'm trying to cope with my own inevitable death in this desolate hole, and I just want some peace and quiet. I'm trying to be nice, but I've met people like you before, and I could shut you up with one sentence if I wanted to." "Oh, believe me," said Fane. "Be People have tried. Brave men and women have gone up against all odds to get me to close my mouth, but you talk when you're scared, interrupted Jonathan harshly, and it seems to me that you talk all the time. Fane slowly closed his mouth, turned away from the old man, and sat in the far corner of the cell. He didn't say another word. Tamala had just walked by Kaya's cell, and she seemed awfully suspicious. Kaya sat on the floor and leaned up against her bed, catching her breath while whispering to Marin and Max, who were hiding behind the sheets. After spending a few minutes mentally communicating with Fane and then convincing Tamala that everything was normal, she felt somewhat drained. "I can't believe you're actually here," whispered Kaya. "I know," said Marin, still shell-shocked from the whole experience. "I can't believe we escaped Earth just to end up in a terrorist jail cell," Max cut in. "Do you regret coming?" Kaya asked. Marin thought for 10 seconds or so about the question. She certainly hadn't expected her first experience in another universe to be spent hiding under a bed, but that was the least of her worries. Her family had turned out to be wildly different people than she had imagined them to be. The idea of living in danger on Gaia, or possibly even dying on Gaia, was not nearly as terrifying as joining the ranks of her anarchistic family. Marin had never rebelled against her dad before, but now, when she thought of him, her heart burned with distaste. "No," Marin whispered. "I don't regret anything." "Might as well make the best of it while we're here," Max said. "So, where can I see a dragon?" "What's a dragon?" Kaya asked. "You know, big, scaly monsters that fly and breathe fire." Kaya thought about this for a second. "Sky cats can be pretty scary, but they don't have scales," she said. "Are you telling me that Gaia, a world full of wizards and magic, doesn't have dragons?" "What's a wizard? And what was that other word? Maggot?" Max slumped over on Marin's shoulder. "Well, I'm thoroughly bummed out now," he said. There was a sudden pop from outside the jail cell. Marin and Max saw Kaya's hands tense up on the floor. "Quiet," Kaya thought to them. Tamala approached the bars of the cell, looking far less intense than she had been earlier, and more concerned. Marin and Max listened to their conversation, trying not to make the slightest noise or even breathe loudly. "Kaya," said Tamala, "we found Jasper." Kaya was filled with excitement and relief, but the look on Tamala's face remained stone cold. "You have to listen to me," Tamala continued. "Your father is on his deathbed. Our spies at the telestation reported that he's poisoned beyond healing, and any deal between him and Rugaru is now off the table. We don't want a dying man working for us." She coughed. "Also, he broke Achak's nose, so there's that." Marin listened to this with abject horror. She was the reason that Jasper was poisoned, and at this point, the fact that it was an accident didn't matter. He was going to die because of her. She was living up to the Casey family name. It was a long time before Kaya spoke. "And you're not going to let me see him again?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. "It's not up to me," said Tamala. "But no, you're not going to see him." "So what happens to me?" asked Kaya. "And Fane?" "Mentalists are rare," said Tamala, "and Fane has shown strong conjurous leanings. We will train you, and if the two of you show promise, you will be welcomed into our family." "And if we don't?" asked Kaya. "What if we don't want to?" Don't even ask that question, said Tamala. You know what would happen. The Western Blaze does not hold prisoners who are no use to them. Tamala turned to walk off down the hallway. You are monsters, Kaya shouted at her. Tamala turned back to Kaya, and her face showed no anger. You're not wrong, said Tamala, but there are a lot of monsters in this world, and maybe you have to become one to fight them. Tamala turned back around and walked out of sight. Kaya put her hands in her face and sank to the ground, trembling and sobbing. Marin, who was now crying herself, reached through the sheet that hung off of the bed and put a hand on Kaya's back. I'm sorry, Marin whispered. This is my fault. You didn't ask to get trapped in my body, said Kaya. It was me that brought you to Monhegan. It was a terrible accident, and it wasn't anyone's fault, but I just wish I could. Kaya sobbed again, barely able to express her deepest fear. I just wish I could see my father before he dies. Then you will, said Max confidently. He flew out from underneath the bed and began hovering around the bars of the cell, making beeping noises as he scanned the metal. These bars are like diamonds. No, super duper diamonds, said Max. The material is so dense that I've never seen anything on Earth like it. It's steel made by internalist blacksmiths, said Kaya. Fane tried to melt it, but it's impossible. Max's blank face seemed to smile. Your friend didn't have the sword of Edgard Zieg, said Max. I'm confident that the blade would cut through the bars like butter, although I'm slightly worried that it might cause an atomic explosion. Max, Marin whispered, we can't just try to escape. What happens when we break out of the cell? We have no idea where we are, and we can't fight an army to get out of here. It looks like we need a map and a plan, said Max. Promise not to laugh. Max suddenly began shrinking, his nanobots pulling together until he was nearly the size of a fly. I'm going to scan the building and send a map to your digital contacts, said Max, his voice coming out small and squeaky. Adventures in cartography! The tiny robot buzzed out of the cell and down the hall, one arm extended into the air like he was flying into battle. Kaya watched him, her desperation subsiding in the ridiculousness of the situation. Is your life always like this? Kaya asked. With Max? Yeah, pretty much, said Marin. Chapter 20. Something Interesting. Rugaru's base, Gaia. Will this really work? Whispered Kaya. Marin sat under the bed talking to Kaya's silhouette through the hanging bedsheet. Max's capacity for understanding the intricacies of a situation are exponentially greater than our own, Marin replied. Kaya whispered. Is that a yes? Sorry, yes. I trust Max with my life. Marin could not see Kaya's face, and she wondered what kind of expression the Monhegan girl wore. There were so many things that Marin wanted to say to her, but now that they were meeting in person, she felt her awkwardness coming down in full force. Marin had almost no experience in talking to people her own age face to face. Her friends on Earth were distant people that she occasionally played video games with online, and that was about it. Kaya, whispered Marin. Yes? Do you trust me? Kaya was quiet for a few seconds, and Marin waited with bated breath. Why do you keep asking that? Asked Kaya. My aunt almost killed you, and my grandpa is the most hated man on your planet. You're not those people. But it's not that simple. Why not? You're thinking way too much about this. Marin sighed. Maybe you're right, she said. Kaya was about to respond, but she found herself wondering why they were whispering at all when only minutes ago she had communicated with Fane using her mentalist abilities. She drew in the power of Gaia and felt for Marin's mind, finding it to be an effortless task. The fact that they were so close together seemed to amplify her abilities. Can you hear me? Thought Kaya. Yes, Marin thought back. This is the weirdest thing ever. I know, and I'm barely even trying. I wonder what would happen if... Kaya drew in more energy and both of the girls suddenly gasped. For a few seconds, they found themselves seeing out of the other person's eyes and their own eyes simultaneously. Kaya could see the prison walls in front of her, as well as the underside of the bed behind her. Beyond the physical sensations, Kaya could feel Marin's hesitation and awkwardness. The sense of being inside of two heads at once was dizzying, and she immediately stopped relaying. Wow, thought Marin. Okay, I take it back. That was way weirder. This shouldn't be possible, thought Kaya. When I reached into the mental realm earlier, everything was fuzzy. The only reason I found Fane is because I already know him so well. I don't even have to try with you. But I just met you a few days ago. I've heard of this happening to twins, but why us? Well, we were born on the same day, replied Marin. But we couldn't be twins, could we? My mom is Catherine Casey. Does that name sound familiar? No. My mother is Sara Aztala, the guardian of Aztala in the Oceanic Guardianship. Does your mom also protect an underwater temple of warrior women? No. My mom sells life insurance. Is there any way that one of our parents isn't really our parent? I don't know. I've only met my mother a handful of times. Guardians don't leave their villages very often. My father met Sara before either of them became guardians. After I was born, both of them refused to give up their goals, and you can't exactly protect an underwater city from halfway around the world. Kaya hesitated, and then was quick to add, It's really fine, though. I don't miss her at all. Marin wasn't convinced. Listening to the sad and hesitant voice of Kaya in her head, Marin suddenly felt a great deal of empathy for the girl. Although their cultures were literally worlds apart, their innermost feelings were nearly identical. My mom's not much of a parent either, Marin thought to her. But it's fine. Kaya reached her hand under the bedsheet and held onto Marin's hand. They sat for a second in silence, finding an odd peace amidst the chaos. Marin! Said Max suddenly in her earpiece. You've got to see this! I'm sending you my video feed! A large room was displayed in Marin's digital contacts, and there was definitely something interesting about it. She jumped in surprise and patted Kaya on the back urgently. Kaya, whispered Marin, use my eyes for a second. Okay. Gross, muttered Max. Both of the girls were suddenly looking at a room with an enormous glass tank in its center. Inside the tank was the familiar sight of a hydra vine. Its tentacle-like vines stuck out in every direction, slithering and slamming against its glass prison. At the front of the tank was a very small hole where a single vine protruded, but it was chained up against the wall of the room. The exposed vine was rotting and dripping with a clear fluid from hundreds, if not thousands of cuts and slashes. It pulled weakly at the chains to no avail. A nomad was chopping at the creature with a dagger and collecting the fluid in a steaming metal bucket, being very careful not to slice all the way through the vines and have them divide. "Desolation," whispered Kaya. "That is brutal." Despite almost having been eaten by a hydra vine several days ago, Marin had to agree. Seeing the beast getting tortured was too much. "Is this the creature that you were telling me about?" asked Max in the earpiece. "The one that can divide its vines exponentially?" "Yes," said Marin. "I have a plan." "That was fast," said Kaya skeptically. "Island girl, in the amount of time it took you to say that, I sorted through 5 million plans in my head and picked the best one. You're going to have to trust me because things are about to get crazy. When I give you the signal, cut through the prison bars with Edgard's sword. 2 parallel horizontal slashes should free you. Get ready." "What's the signal?" asked Marin. "When something interesting happens." They watched from Marin's contacts as Max flew up to the ear of the nomadic man and grew to his usual size. "Hello, sir," said Max casually. "Are you having an interesting day?" The nomad jumped in surprise and turned around swinging his dagger blindly. When he saw a tiny robot flying in the air in front of him, he looked absolutely confused and dropped his weapon. "What are you?" asked the nomad. "Something interesting," said Max. The robot held out his hand, felt for the nearly unlimited power source in the air all around him, and sent out a carefully measured sound wave through the room that instantly shattered the glass tank. Water filled the air and vines sprang out in every direction, dividing and growing larger. Some of the vines yanked the chains right out of the wall and freed its trapped limb. And then the hydra vine let out a primal roar that pounded at the inside of their heads, even from several floors below. The nomad bent down and reached frantically for his dagger, dropping it several times in his panic while cursing loudly. "I don't think it likes you very much," said Max, "and I can't say I blame it. You better get out of here before—" Whoa! The hydravine sprang forward at an unbelievable speed and propelled its octopus-like head toward the nomad. Before the guard was able to contemplate teleporting away, a dozen vines wrapped around his body and tossed him into the open mouth at the center of the creature. The video feed suddenly cut out and was replaced with the grainy message, "This motion picture has been rated R for graphic violence by the Classification and Rating Administration." "Did that guy just get eaten?" asked Kaya. "I think that's our signal," said Marin urgently, grabbing Edgard's sword from under the bed and handing it to Kaya. Kaya nodded and swung the sword with all her weight at the bars of the prison. The internalist metal let out a noise like an explosion as the sword cut through, leaving red-hot slash marks that were literally steaming. Kaya made a second slash closer to the floor and then kicked the bars out of place. The 2 girls climbed through the opening and then looked up and down the hallway. "Which way do we go?" asked Kaya. A metal orb rocketed from around the corner and snapped onto Marin's wrist with a pop. Max's panicked voice filled the hallway. "Right, left, down the stairs, avoid the horrible monster, don't die, and then left again." The walls of the cell were shaking, and noises that sounded like massive explosions were coming from overhead. Jonathan York had been quietly meditating, but now he paced back and forth anxiously. "Could that be the High Seven?" he muttered to himself. "I knew they would come for me." "I don't think so," said Fane. "Kaya told me that they were thinking of a plan, and it—" "Hold on a second. I'm getting another call from her." "Fane!" Kaya's voice thundered in his head, and this time it rang so clearly in the mental realm that Jonathan could hear it too. "It's true," Jonathan whispered in awe. Your friend really is a mentalist. I can only imagine how— Shush, old man! We're coming past the cell in about 5 seconds, Kaya called. Be ready to— Ah! Sorry, that was just the— Oh my Gaia! They're everywhere! We're escaping, Mr. York, said Fane confidently. Are you ready to fight our way out of here? Fight? Jonathan scoffed. My relaying abilities are of the subtle nature. I'm no good in combat. I'll take that as a yes, said Fane. Here they come. Kaya and Marin rounded the corner with a terrified look on their faces. Kaya swung the sword through the prison bars before they had a chance to say a word. At the same time, Marin held out her hand and a burst of energy shot from her wristband, sending the bars flying across the room and smacking the walls with a great clunk. My heroes, exclaimed Fane. You must be Marin. It's nice to— Vines! Kaya and Marin yelled in near unison, pulling Fane from the cell and frantically running down the hallway as Jonathan followed. A batch of hydra vines covered in thorns was rapidly growing and spreading throughout the building behind them, engulfing everything in sight. They turned the corner and darted into the nearest room. Fane spun around, raised his arms, and relayed a wall of flames into the doorway behind them. The vines shrank back once they were within reach of the fire and squealed. Marin's wristband morphed and became the tiny human figure of Max once more. Nice to meet you, Fane, said Max. Hold those flames as long as you can. Fane nodded determinedly, scrunched his face in concentration, and the wall of fire sparked and crackled. Where's the exit? Asked Marin, glancing around the room. No doors or windows anywhere in the stronghold, said Max. Stupid teleporters. I'm building energy back up so I can burst through these walls. They're thick, so I'll need a few seconds to charge. Kaya observed the room for the first time and was suddenly taken aback. Every inch of the floor, walls, and ceiling were covered with elaborate paintings. Although there was no furniture in the room, the paintings almost made it look like they were standing in the middle of a castle. A massive chandelier was painted onto the ceiling. The floor was painted to look like fancy tiles, and large windows were painted upon the walls. Through one painted window was a painted night sky where a full moon hung motionless. What is this? Asked Kaya. That was my work, said Jonathan. The nomads had me paint this room day and night, and then, when I was done, they threw me in their prisons. It's an exact replica of the High Guardian's night chambers. Rugaru would spend most of his time meditating in this room, but I'm not sure why. Maybe he wanted to feel like a High Guardian. Fane's arms were trembling from relaying so much energy toward the flames blocking the doorway. How much longer? He asked through his teeth. 10 more seconds, said Max, holding his glowing hands out in front of him and pointing them at the nearest wall. Suddenly, a male nomad appeared with a pop, brandishing a long spear that he pointed at the group. Stop! Yelled the nomad. Kaya swung Edgard's sword at the man, but he simply disappeared and reappeared behind them. Marin summoned all of the energy she could and sent it toward him, but it simply came out as a light burst of wind. I don't know what I'm doing! Help us! Marin yelled at Jonathan. For a moment, the artist looked like he was going to run, but a look of determination quickly grew on his face. Jonathan snapped his fingers at the nomad, and suddenly, all of the tattoos on the warrior's body turned from black to bright pink. The nomad reared back his spear, but when he saw the transformation, he was overcome with complete bewilderment. Said the nomad, what in desolation just happened? Now! Max yelled, releasing the energy in his hands and blowing open a large hole in the bricks ahead of them. Fane extinguished the wall of fire, and vines suddenly sprang out of the doorway. The nomad saw the hydrovines heading towards him and simply popped out of existence. The entire group darted through the opening as quickly as they could and ran into the cold night air. There was snow falling from overhead and mountains stretching for as far as the eye could see in every direction. The stars were unbelievably bright over the mountain range, and the wind was so cold that it felt as if it were blowing right through their skin. Thane summoned a fireball in his hand, and they all huddled around it, listening to the chaos ensuing in the stronghold behind them. "I did it," said Max. "We escaped! Again! And now we're high up in the mountains with no way to get down. That's not even mentioning the angry nomads in the building behind us getting attacked by a man-eating plant. I feel like this keeps happening to me." A section of the building exploded and hundreds of thorny vines snaked out into the cold air. "Run!" yelled Fane, but it was already too late. The vines quickly encircled the group as the 5 of them drew close together fearfully. It was now as if a wall of slimy thorns was growing around them on every side. The great head of the hydrovine descended from above and looked at its prey with cold black eyes. "Food for my children!" it roared, vibrating their skulls. "Hello, friend," said Max hesitantly. "Remember me?" A vine leapt towards Max and stopped inches in front of the robot's face. And then, amazingly, it gently touched the side of Max's smooth head. A deep, almost alien-like voice telepathically spoke in all of their minds once again. "Twofold." The Hydra's head sank back into the massive vines behind it, and the slithering walls around them began to disperse. The creature pulled itself back inside of the building, and less than a second later, the entire place exploded. What must have been thousands of vines leapt out from every crack in the building, and the hydrovine now looked to be as big as the nomadic base itself. It seemed to gather its energy for a moment, and Kaya could feel a great stirring in the power of Gaia around them. The hydrovine pushed at the ground with its multitude of ligaments, and with one great leap, it was sent soaring down the side of the mountain. A final thought rang clear in the mental realm. "My children!" Everybody breathed a collective sigh of relief, and it almost felt like their hearts were just now resuming usual activity. "It didn't kill us," Kaya marveled. "Have you ever heard of a hydrovine sparing someone's life?" "Of course it didn't kill us," said Max gleefully. "I made friends with it. What should we name it?" Fane leapt with excitement and stared at the robot with a wild look in his eyes. "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" asked Max, and Fane nodded. Then, in perfect unison, the 2 of them shouted, "Earl!" "Did we just become friends, little dude?" asked Fane. "I'll like you a lot more if you call me Max, small-brained boy," said Max. "And don't celebrate too soon. We're still stuck at the top of a mountain." Kaya took a few steps forward and looked over the edge of the cliff. There was no way anybody could get down on foot. Then she turned around and looked at the ruined base behind them. "Where are the nomads?" she asked. "I'm guessing that they all teleported away in fear," said Marin. "Or they were, well, you know." "Eaten," said Jonathan gruffly. "Serves them right." "But there were kids in there," said Kaya. "And I know they were nomads, but you don't really think that—" "No," said Max suddenly. "They're fine. Before I freed the hydrovine, I scanned the whole building. There were only 3 nomads that stayed behind. The one that got eaten, the one with the spear, and the woman that kept walking by her cell." "That must have been Tamala," said Kaya. And just like that, Tamala appeared behind Kaya. Her clothes were torn, and she had a wild look in her eyes after running from the hydrovine. She had somehow appeared without making a sound, and Kaya had no idea who was behind her. "Kaya, look out!" Jonathan shouted, but it was too late. Tamala gently placed a hand on Kaya's shoulder.
Hi, this is the author. If you've been enjoying this series, please consider giving the video a like, subscribing to my page, or recommending the book to a friend. It really helps more than you could know. Again, thank you for listening to The Bridge, Scrolling Text Edition Part 4. Fifth and final part coming next week.